The courtroom fell silent. Not the usual kind of silence, this was different. This was the kind of silence that wraps around your chest and squeezes until you can barely breathe. A trembling voice, so soft it barely rose above a whisper, cut through the air like a knife. She threw me out of my own home. Those 7 words, simple, devastating, true, hit harder than any gavel ever could. For the first time in decades, Judge Judy's courtroom, known for sharp wit and rapid-fire judgments, stood frozen. Even Judge Judy herself, the woman who had dismantled liars and con artists with a single glance, looked up slowly. Her pen stopped mid-air. Her eyes glistened, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling: disbelief. The cameras caught it all. America's toughest judge, visibly shaken, fighting back tears. The man speaking was Edward Hayes, 92 years old, World War II veteran, carpenter, widower. His hands, rough and weathered from decades of honest work, clutched a crumpled eviction notice. Every line on his face told a story of sacrifice, of love, of a lifetime spent building something real from nothing. And sitting across from him, arms folded, face cold as stone, was his daughter, Melissa Hayes, dressed in a blazer that cost more than most people's monthly rent, diamonds glinting on her wrist. She didn't flinch as her father's voice broke. When he trembled, she smirked. That single expression, captured on camera, would ignite a wildfire of national outrage. Within hours of the preview airing, social media exploded. Hashtags like #JusticeForEdward and #HeartlessDaughter trended worldwide. Comment sections overflowed with disbelief, heartbreak, and fury. How do you evict the man who raised you? I haven't spoken to my dad in years. Calling him now. Thousands shared the clip. Grandparents, veterans, celebrities, calling it the most emotional moment ever broadcast on television. But this wasn't just a family dispute. This was something darker. Something that would force an entire nation to ask, how far can betrayal go before it becomes evil? If this story already breaks your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Because on this channel, every story reminds us why justice still matters. Edward Hayes was the kind of man America was built on. Quiet, humble, stubbornly decent. He returned from World War II with nothing but a duffel bag, a Purple Heart, and a promise to himself: build a life worth living. And that's exactly what he did. With his own 2 hands, Edward built a small 2-bedroom house on a quiet street. Every nail, every brick, every beam, he laid them all himself. Took him 2 years, working evenings and weekends, but when it was done, it was his. Not the bank's, not anyone else's. His. He married his sweetheart, Helen, in that house. Raised their daughter, Melissa, in that house. Grew old with Helen in that house. And when she passed away after 57 years of marriage, he stayed. He tended her garden every single day, trimming roses, pulling weeds, talking softly to her headstone as if she could still hear him. Neighbors said you could set your watch by Edward. Every morning at 6:30, he'd shuffle down the creaky front steps with coffee in one hand and birdseed in the other, scattering it for the sparrows that gathered at his porch. Every evening at 6, he'd be in the garden, bent over the soil, whispering to Helen about his day. He wasn't rich. His pension was modest. His clothes were old. But he was proud. Proud of the roof he built, the daughter he raised, the quiet dignity he carried. That daughter, Melissa, was the center of his world. When she was little, he called her his miracle. She was smart, ambitious, full of life. Edward worked double shifts to pay for her education, her dance lessons, her dreams. But somewhere along the way, Melissa changed. The warmth disappeared. The love turned cold. She started measuring her worth in handbags and real estate listings. While Edward wore the same flannel shirts he'd owned for decades, Melissa chased status, money, admiration. When Helen died, something in Melissa hardened completely. She stopped visiting as often, stopped calling. To her, the family home wasn't a sanctuary anymore. It was an asset, an investment opportunity, as she coldly put it one night over dinner. Still, Edward believed in her. When she showed up one afternoon with legal papers in hand, smiling sweetly, saying, "Dad, I'm just getting things in order. You deserve a nicer place." He didn't question it. He trusted his only child. He took the pen, hesitated for just a moment, then signed where she told him to. She kissed his forehead and said, "Don't worry, Daddy. I'll handle everything." But weeks later, everything changed. Edward came home from the hospital. He'd been recovering from pneumonia, to find a bright yellow eviction notice pinned to his door. The name on the notice wasn't a stranger's. It was Melissa Hayes, his own daughter. She had transferred the property into her name, remortgaged it, sold half the land. The house he built, the one he shared with his late wife, now legally belonged to the woman he once rocked to sleep. When the sheriff arrived to enforce the eviction, the old man didn't fight. He simply walked outside, sat on the wooden porch he'd built half a century ago, and placed a worn leather suitcase beside him. In his lap, he held a framed photo of Helen, her smile frozen in another lifetime. The neighbors watched from their windows. Some cried. Some were too stunned to speak. That image, a 92-year-old veteran sitting on the curb, surrounded by the home he built and the memories he lost, would later become one of the most powerful symbols of elder abuse in modern America. If you believe no parent deserves this, tap that like button right now. Because stories like this remind us why compassion still matters. By the time the case reached Judge Judy's courtroom, the world was already watching. Clips of Edward's eviction had spread like wildfire. Millions of views, thousands of comments, endless debates about greed, family, and morality. People weren't just tuning in for entertainment anymore. They were demanding justice. News outlets teased the episode as the most emotional case in Judge Judy's history. Social media platforms lit up with messages like, "We need Judy to do what the system failed to do. Protect this man." When Edward entered the courtroom that morning, he moved slowly but with quiet dignity. His suit was clean but old, the same one he'd worn to Helen's funeral years ago. He carried no anger, no bitterness, only a weary sadness that seemed to fill the space around him. Every step he took echoed the life he'd built and lost. When he reached the plaintiff's table, he gave a small nod to Judge Judy, respectful, humble, trusting. Then Melissa walked in. Perfect posture, designer handbag slung across her arm, lips glossed, hair styled immaculately. To her, this wasn't about justice. It was about winning. Her heels clicked across the floor like punctuation marks to her confidence. She smiled at the cameras, the same kind of smile that hides 1,000 lies. Even before a single word was spoken, the contrast between father and daughter was unmistakable. One carried history, the other carried ego. Judge Judy glanced up briefly, her sharp eyes scanning Melissa like a hawk assessing its prey. She'd seen that look before, arrogance wrapped in false innocence. Her instincts kicked in immediately. Something about this case didn't sit right. This wasn't a simple family disagreement. This smelled like manipulation. "Let's start with the paperwork," Judy said, her tone even but razor-edged. Melissa began her well-rehearsed story. "Your Honor, my father has memory issues. I was only trying to help him manage the house." He signed the papers willingly. Judy didn't interrupt. She let Melissa talk, because she wanted to hear how deep the hole would get. Edward sat silently, eyes lowered, clutching his worn hat. When Melissa finished her performance, Judy looked down at the stack of documents before her. Property deeds, financial transfers, a so-called renovation agreement. Her fingers flipped through the pages, eyes darting from line to line. The courtroom was silent except for the soft rustle of paper. Then Judy frowned. "Interesting," she murmured. "The signatures on these documents don't match the others in the file." A chill swept through the audience. Even Melissa's confident posture wavered for a second. Judy leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Miss Hayes," she said slowly, "if this was truly about helping your father, why did his bank statements show withdrawals he didn't authorize?" Melissa blinked rapidly, fumbling for words. Judy didn't press yet. Instead, she looked toward the camera and said in her firm, iconic tone, "Something's not adding up here." And I intend to find out what. Judge Judy's pen tapped lightly against the desk, a rhythm that, in her courtroom, always meant danger for the dishonest. The tension was thick enough to touch. She flipped the final page of the contract and looked up at Melissa with a stare that could slice through steel. "Miss Hayes," she began quietly, "did you prepare this document yourself?" Melissa gave a practiced laugh, one that sounded more rehearsed than nervous. "No, Your Honor. It was done by a lawyer. I just helped my father understand it." Judy's eyebrow twitched, the kind of micro-expression viewers had learned meant she'd already caught someone lying. She held up the supposed renovation agreement between her fingers and said, "Because according to this notary stamp, the document was certified on March 3rd. Yet this signature," she tapped the corner with her pen, "was added on March 12th. 9 days later." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Edward's head dropped, his hand tightening on his hat. Judy continued, voice like ice. "That means this document was altered after it was notarized. In plain English, Miss Hayes, that's forgery." Melissa's lips parted, but no words came out. Her eyes darted toward the cameras, then back to Judy. "You're mistaken. My father was confused." "Don't finish that sentence," Judy snapped, cutting her off. "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. I can spot a forged signature from a mile away, and this one screams fraud." She lifted another paper from the stack, flipping it toward the bailiff. "And that's not all. Your father's pension payments every month, direct deposit. They didn't stop when the property changed hands. They were rerouted." Melissa froze. "To your account," Judy said sharply, her voice rising now. "Did you really think he wouldn't notice? Losing his home and his dignity." For a moment, silence. Then, with a smirk that chilled the room, Melissa muttered, "He's old. He doesn't even remember signing it." The audience gasped audibly. Judy's expression changed from skeptical to glacial. The air in the courtroom dropped 10 degrees. "You know," she said softly, "I've met liars, thieves, and manipulators, but rarely do I meet someone who combines all three so proudly." She leaned forward, eyes locked on Melissa. "Well, I remember justice, and I'm about to refresh your memory of it." Judge Judy sat perfectly still for a long moment, letting the weight of the evidence settle like dust after an explosion. Melissa shifted nervously in her seat, the smugness drained from her face. Then Judy glanced toward the bailiff. "Bring in the witness," she said. The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and a middle-aged woman entered slowly, her posture careful, her eyes soft. It was Clara Watkins, Edward's caregiver. She had taken care of him for nearly 3 years, through pneumonia, arthritis, and long, lonely evenings when his daughter never called. Judy motioned for her to take the stand. "Ms. Watkins," Judy began, her tone measured, "how often did you see Miss Melissa Hayes visit her father after his hospitalization?" Clara's hands fidgeted nervously. "Not once, Your Honor." A murmur swept through the audience. Clara continued, her voice trembling. "Mr. Hayes used to wait by the window every Sunday, thinking she'd come by. He'd put on his best shirt. Sometimes he'd even make tea. But she never showed up. When I'd suggest calling her, he'd just smile and say, 'She's busy. Maybe next week.'" The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the sound crew stopped moving. Edward's eyes filled, and he looked down at his hands, trying to steady their shake. Judy leaned forward, her expression softening. "Mr. Hayes," she said gently, "is that true?" He rose slowly to his feet, every movement fragile but full of grace. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I wasn't mad at her, Your Honor. I just wanted her to love me." The audience collectively exhaled. Some wiped tears, others whispered prayers. Even Judy's face changed. She pressed her lips together and looked away for a second, steadying herself. She'd seen thousands of liars and cheats in her career, but this was different. This was a wound money couldn't heal. When she looked back at Melissa, the warmth was gone. Her voice turned quiet, lethal. "Melissa Hayes," she said, "I have one question for you. Would your mother be proud of you today?" For the first time, Melissa had no answer. She stared at the floor, frozen, tears welling but unshed. The silence stretched unbearably long. Judy nodded slowly, as though confirming what everyone already knew. She lifted the papers in her hand and set them down with finality. "You didn't just steal a house," she said, her tone trembling but sharp. "You stole from your father's heart before you stole his home." The words hit like thunder. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by sniffles, applause, and a few audible sobs. Even the bailiff blinked hard to keep his composure. Judy signed the final order, her voice echoing through the chamber. "The property is to be returned immediately. Restitution and penalties will be imposed. And Miss Hayes, consider this your final lesson. Some debts can't be paid with money." Edward sat back down, tears streaming down his face. Judy gave him a small nod, not as a judge, but as a human being who had seen justice done the only way it should be, with compassion and truth. If this verdict touched your soul, hit that like button right now. Because moments like this remind us what real justice looks like. The days that followed the verdict felt like a moral reckoning played out in real time. News outlets that had once teased the story as a shocking family dispute now ran headlines that read, "Judge Judy exposes daughter's fraud, elder abuse investigation launched." Clips of the verdict flooded television and social media alike. The world watched as the woman who had smirked at her father's pain now faced the full weight of the consequences. Melissa Hayes's world unraveled overnight. Her real estate license was suspended pending a formal investigation into financial exploitation of the elderly. Former clients withdrew their contracts. Her so-called business partners in Miami cut all ties, deleting her from websites and denying any involvement. Every local station replayed the same haunting moment. The instant Judge Judy asked her, "Would your mother be proud of you today?" The footage became symbolic, a cautionary echo about greed, betrayal, and karma that needed no explanation. Meanwhile, Edward Hayes's quiet dignity made him an overnight symbol of perseverance. Local journalists visited his restored home to film a follow-up interview. But the scene they captured was no spectacle. It was peace. His garden, once overgrown and neglected, had been revived by volunteers who came after seeing his story. Veterans organizations raised funds to repair his roof and repaint the walls. Neighborhood children brought him flowers, drawings, and handwritten letters saying, "You're our hero, Mr. Hayes." For the first time in months, the old man smiled on camera. It wasn't a victory grin. It was something softer, quieter, almost holy. Sitting in his favorite wooden chair beside the window, he looked into the camera and said, "I didn't win money. I won my peace." Those words became the emotional heartbeat of every article and every clip that followed. People across the country shared them, writing captions like, "This man just reminded us what real wealth is." The video of his smile paired with Judy's final verdict reached millions of views within days. Hashtags shifted from anger to hope. Hashtag Peace for Edward and hashtag Justice with Heart replaced the earlier fury. Judge Judy herself issued a short statement through the show's network. It wasn't polished or rehearsed, just a single line that resonated with everyone who had watched. Justice is not just about the law. It's about doing what's right. This wasn't just a courtroom case. It was a mirror held up to society, forcing us to ask uncomfortable questions. How do we treat our elders? What does family really mean? And when money is on the line, do our values hold? Edward Hayes didn't just win a legal battle. He won something far more valuable: his dignity, his peace, and the respect of millions who saw his story and were moved to tears. Melissa Hayes didn't just lose a case. She lost her reputation, her career, and the trust of everyone who once believed in her. But perhaps most importantly, this story reminded the world that justice still exists, that there are still people willing to fight for what's right, and that even in the coldest, cruelest moments, compassion can break through. If the story touched your heart, don't just watch and leave. Hit that subscribe button. Share this video, because stories like this need to be told. They need to be heard. And they need to remind us all that in a world that often feels broken, justice, real justice, still matters. Thank you for watching. And remember, treat your elders with love. because one day you'll be one too.